Alan Turing's housekeeper found him dead on June 8, 1954. The half-eaten apple beside him held the key to his horrific final moments. Alan Turing was born on June 23, 1912, the second son of Julius and Ethel Turing. His father's work in the Indian Civil Service meant that his parents often travelled abroad, leaving Alan and his brother in the care of a retired army couple. Even as a boy, his brilliance stood out. He was so impressive that he even caught the eye of the headmistress. According to her, she had clever boys and hardworking boys, but Alan is a genius. It seemed that even at this young age, Turing was destined for greatness. At the age of 13, Turing began attending Sherborne School, a boarding school in Dorset. Turing may not have been a popular boy at Sherborne, but he did manage to make one lasting connection. Turing met Christopher Colin Morcom during this time. The young boys formed a deep and significant relationship. Morcom had been described as Turing's first love. Though if it was love, it never had the chance to flourish. Christopher Morcom succumbed to complications of bovine tuberculosis, an illness he'd been suffering from for several years, in February 1930. The passing affected Turing deeply. Turing believed that all the passions he poured into his work was exactly what Christopher would have wanted him to do. What's more, all of his dedicated study laid the foundations of his next chapter. Turing's love of science and mathematics led him straight to King's College, Cambridge, where he excelled. They awarded him first-class honours in mathematics. He carried on with his studies, entering a master's course and eventually becoming a fellow of King's College. The gears of Turing's mind never seemed to stop turning, and in 1936, he wrote one of the most important papers of all time. Turing worked on several projects and papers, but there was one paper that stood above all the rest. This was his May 1936 paper on computable numbers with an application to Einstein's problem. In this paper, Turing proposed a hypothetical device that in theory could compute any conceivable mathematical computation if written as an algorithm. This device became known as the Turing machine, and Turing machines would eventually save the world. People have called Turing's paper and his Turing machine easily the most influential math paper in history. However, in the late 30s, Turing machines were theory alone. It garnered Turing much talk in mathematical communities, but little else. He carried on with his studies, moving to Princeton University to study under mathematician Alonzo Church. Turing gained a PhD in mathematics from Princeton in June 1938 and returned to the UK. Little did he know, there were already storms brewing on the horizon. Turing may have remained relatively unknown if the world had not erupted into conflict for the second time in such a short period. Wars are long and bloody things. However, what is rarely spoken about is how heavily they rely upon communication. The Allies won World War II because of the British's ability to decode messages, and they needed Turing to accomplish this. Following the conclusion of World War I, the government created the Government Code and Cipher School, GC and CS. The goal of the school was to help aid British intelligence, both in peacetime and in the unfortunate event of another conflict. Turing became involved with GC and CS in September 1938. He had one focus, something called the Enigma machine. During World War II, the Allied forces faced several enemies. Not just the explosives or firepower of the German army, but also their Enigma machine. The Enigma machine was a device that could scramble the letters of the alphabet, enabling the creation of secret messages. It could create unfathomable number combinations, and the Germans typically changed the key to the cipher daily. Without cracking the Enigma's secrets, the Allies had very little to work with. While it took the conflict a longer time to reach the shores of England, Poland had been dealing with the threat of Germany for years by the end of the 1930s. Polish minds broke the Enigma's secret as early as December 1932. At a meeting in July 1939, they shared their knowledge of the Enigma with British and French intelligence. Britain and Turing had the blueprints, but it was still grueling work to unlock the codes. Bletchley Park is an estate about an hour north of London by train. In the 1930s, the estate included a modest manor house and sprawling lands. The first members of GC and CS began to populate Bletchley Park. Turing would soon be among them. It became clear that what British needed was manpower, and soon Bletchley Park became the secret meeting location for some of the most brilliant minds. In the words of Asa Briggs, a fellow codebreaker, you need exceptional talent. You need genius at Bletchley, and Turing's was that genius. The Polish Cipher Bureau had provided Turing and his fellow codebreakers with the basics. However, there was a worrisome problem with the Polish system. It depended on an indicator procedure that proved unreliable. So when the Germans eventually altered it in 1940, there was a brand new challenge to overcome. Turing's methods would prove to be far more effective. It only took Turing weeks at Bletchley Park to improve upon the Polish cryptological bomb. This machine was called the Bombe. The Bombe machines decrypted the Enigma code through a crib, which was a term used at Bletchley to mark any known or suspected plaintext at any point in any enciphered message. This allowed the Allies to better use their manpower, coming to solutions more quickly. They were indispensable to the effort. However, they were beasts to handle. The Bombe machine approximately weighed a ton, stood at over 6 feet, and had a width of 7 feet. They operated through large tubes in the back that required being set manually. Turing, along with his fellow cryptanalysts, had changed the course of the conflict. However, it was not enough, and by late 1941, frustrations were rising. They had invented the Bombe, yet they did not have enough units, nor enough manpower to tackle all the signals. Finally, Turing and his cryptanalysts had had enough. Taking matters into their own hands, the group wrote a letter to Winston Churchill in October. The letter, which named Turing first, emphasised how little they needed in relation to how many lives they could save if the government granted their request. Churchill's response was jaw-dropping. Upon receiving the letter, Churchill acted immediately. He reached out to General Ismay, writing, "Action this day." make sure they have all they want on extreme priority, and report to me that this has been done. By November 18, the wheels of change were finally in motion, and by the end of World War II, more than 200 bombers were in use at Bletchley Park. Back in 1939, the German naval Enigma had posed a particular problem. Its indicator system was more complex than those in other services, and proved to be the most difficult to solve. Turing decided to take a crack at it, because no one else was doing anything about it, and I could have it to myself. By the end of that year, Turing proved successful in cracking the German naval Enigma, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. Not only did he solve a key component of their indicator system, but he also came up with the idea of banderismus. Essentially, banderismus was a method that eliminated specific sequences for the Enigma, making the process of testing settings quicker by eliminating portions of them. It was also around that time Turing met a fellow codebreaker, Joan Clark. Turing and Clark both worked together in Hut 8, and Clark was the only woman to practice banderismus, which perhaps was part of Turing's admiration for her. In 1941, Turing proposed to her, and Clark accepted. However, there was a glaring problem. You see, Turing was gay. He never gave his reasoning for proposing to Clark, though one can assume, given the pressures of the time, that he had hoped to elevate some loneliness by tying the knot with a woman he admired, not to mention one of his closest friends. Turing eventually confessed his preferences to Clark, who reportedly had no issue with it. However, in the end, Turing could not deny himself so completely, and he opted to break off the engagement. While the bomber machine and his work in codebreaking were the two areas in which Turing is best remembered for, and likely had the most impact, he had more to do. He eventually wound up working at Hanslope Park for the Secret Service's Radio Security Service. Here he came up with yet another brilliant innovation. Delving even further into electronics, Turing devised another machine, a portable voice encryption system. Its name, Delilah. However, it was made too late for anyone to use during World War II. The enemy had finally been defeated. But if Turing thought the most dangerous chapter of his life was over, he was so wrong. The government swore everyone who worked at Bletchley Park to secrecy, even when World War II ended and they returned to their regular lives. They were to keep mum about what they'd done. For Turing, he returned to London and worked on what he was most passionate about: math, science, and computers. But keeping the secrets of World War II proved to be an extremely vexing endeavour. Turing became interested in artificial intelligence and theorized that if a computer could think like a human, to the point in which a human could not tell it was a computer, then it would be intelligent. They created captcha tests based on the reversal of this theory. Though Turing's professional life was undeniably rich, his personal life was a downright struggle. At the time, it was against the law to be gay in England. This would spell problems for Turing when he met a young man named Arnold Murray in 1951. They quickly dove into a secret romance, though it was far from a fairy tale romance. Near the end of January 1952, not long after starting a relationship with Murray, someone burgled Turing's house. In a chilling twist, Murray admitted to knowing the burglar, and Turing ultimately alerted the authorities. During the investigation, Turing admitted to having a physical relationship with Murray, and sadly, both men suffered the horrifying consequences. Charged with gross indecency, Turing faced trial for his so-called offence. Turing's case went to court on March 31st, 1952, and under advice from his brother and lawyer, pleaded guilty. They charged Turing and gave him a devastating choice: imprisonment or probation, on the condition that he undergo hormonal injections that would supposedly reduce his libido. Turing took the probation, but the misery unleashed was unforgettable. The conditions of the probation stated that Turing would take synthetic estrogen for a year. As a result, he not only suffered from impotency, but also developed breast tissue. Turing wrote that, "No doubt I shall emerge from it all a different man, but quite who, I've not found out." The charge also had lasting impacts on his career. In the summer of 1951, Guy Burgess and Donald McLean, two gay men, defected to the Soviet Union, taking their secrets with them. As a result, the Foreign Office became suspicious of anyone who identified as gay, believing they could possibly be a security risk. This was a major blow for Turing, who consequently lost his security clearance and could no longer work for GCHQ. Even so, this was just the calm before the storm. On the morning of June 8th, 1954, Turing's housekeeper made the most tragic discovery. Turing, it seemed, had passed during the night. Strangely, she found him in his bed with a half-eaten apple beside him. It was this ominous apple that likely held the key to how this 41-year-old genius had met such a sudden and sad end. Officials performed an autopsy, which came to the conclusion that the official cause of Turing's demise was cyanide poisoning. Because of the position of the apple, many assumed it held the poison, and that Turing had likely injected it with a fatal dose before consuming it. However, as fate would have it, the apple was never properly tested for cyanide. Turing's brother, who identified his body, was pressured into accepting the verdict of the coroner's inquest. The conclusion was that Turing had taken his own life. Although it would take 50 years after his passing, the injustice of Turing's imprisonment did not go unacknowledged. At the end of 2011, William Jones and John Leach started a petition to force the government pardon Turing for his conviction. In the request that they made for the pardon, they wrote, "Alan Turing was driven to a terrible despair and early death by the nation he had done so much to save. This remains a shame on the British government and British history. It was a public campaign that gained the attention of many notable people, including Stephen Hawking. After much red tape, Queen Elizabeth signed a pardon for Turing in December 2013. Despite his unfortunate treatment by the government, not to mention his tragic end, Alan Turing was a hero of not just Britain, but the entire world. While it's impossible to now say what the outcome of World War II would have been without him, most estimate that his work helped shorten it by years, saving millions of lives. The world would have been a very different place without Alan Turing, and his memory lives on for all who follow in his footsteps. Thanks for watching History Expose. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page Factinate for more incredible facts about everything.